Hey guys, it's your boy Night Tales. Now today's video is going to be a little different than the other videos I've been putting on my channel. I will still be continuing the What If Kira Unleashed His Ego What If series because I've grown to love that series and I have a lot of creative ideas for it. But just because I've also come to notice that the videos take about maybe close to a month to finish and put out, just because of the amount of editing and the art starting to get commissioned for it and whatnot. Just because I have to get all those done, it takes a month or maybe more to get a single video for that what if done. And as good as the videos are, and if you don't know, you definitely should go watch it. It's an amazing series. As good as the videos are, I know that I don't want to keep you guys starved of content. So in the middle of the what if series, I will also be putting out little theory what ifs. Like today's what if. Today's gonna be a Demon Slayer theory of what if there was a moon-breathing Hashira. And for that to work for me, he would need to be a direct descendant of Kokushibo. And yes, I already know about Muichiro and whatnot, but I mean direct as in he's the spitting image of Kokushibo when he was a human being. So yeah, hope you guys enjoy. If you enjoy, like and subscribe. Here we go. So all the events that have already happened in the Demon Slayer universe up onto the Hashira meeting would go exactly as it went in the canonical story of Demon Slayer. You would have Tanjiro losing his whole family and only having Nezuko left. You would have his training under Urokodaki. You would have his run-in with Muzan and the drum demon and whatnot, and finally Rui. And then our story picks up at the Hashira meeting. Tanjiro would regain consciousness in a courtyard that he's never been in before, after just being recently rescued from Mount Natagumo, from where the Spider family was and where Rui was. He would find himself in the presence of 9 individuals, to which he only recognized one Giyu Tomioka, the Water Hashira. And after a bit of exposition from the person holding him down, he would realize that he was in the presence of all the Hashira, the highest ranking members of the Demon Slayer Corps, who went as follows: Gyome Himejima, the stone-breathing Hashira; Muichiro Tokito, the mist-breathing Hashira; Obanai Iguru, the serpent-breathing Hashira; Kyojuro Rengoku, the flame-breathing Hashira; Mitsuri Kanroji, the love-breathing Hashira; Tengen Uzui, the sound-breathing Hashira; and Shinobu Kocho, the insect-breathing Hashira. It was also revealed to Tanjiro that they were in the midst of deciding the fate of him and his sister, because Tanjiro had broken Demon Slayer core rules by protecting a demon. It seemed that the general consensus around Hashira was that he should be put to death along with his sister, and that Giyu Tomioka should suffer the same fate because he was protecting Tanjiro. But before any brash actions were taken, the insect Hashira wanted to ask for Tanjiro's side of the story. She would give him some water, and she would let him tell them exactly what would drive him to protect a demon, even though he was a demon slayer, which is when he would reveal to them that the demon that he was protecting was his sister. He would recount the tragic tale of how he lost his family and how she was the only one left, but when she came to, she was a demon. But he would also let them know that it has been 2 years since Nezuko became a demon, and in that entire time she had not hurt a single human soul. To absolutely no one's surprise, the general consensus did not really shift, with some of the Hashiras not believing him at all, and some just not changing their minds on the topic altogether. And that is when Tanjiro would yell at the top of his lungs that him and his sister would fight to protect humanity as demon slayers together. And that is when a scar-ridden and very rugged man would join in on the conversation, walking to the side, holding what was, to Tanjiro's horror, the box that Nezuko was inside. He would reply to Tanjiro's resolve by saying that he was a fool to believe that something like that was possible in the first place. And that is when he unsheathed his sword and attempts to stab the box, which would skewer Nezuko through the box. But that is when a shadowy figure would leap at him from the roof of the building they were standing in front of, perfectly parrying his sword strike, pushing him away from Nezuko's box. The other Hashira seemed to be surprised. But the surprise seemed to come less from the actual action that happened, but more from the presence of the person who the action came from. The serpent Hashira, Obanai, would drop down from his tree and stand behind him while Shinazugawa still stood in front of him. Obanai would ask him what he thought he was doing, but the person wouldn't respond. He would just turn to Tanjiro and ask him if he heard right and if his last name really was Kamado. Tanjiro would reply by simply nodding, which would lead to the person giving an exasperated sigh. He would then ask Tanjiro once again to confirm the details surrounding Nezuko's condition, to which he would confirm again, including the tragic events that happened to his family, which would then garner another sigh from the man. Shinazugawa would draw his blade again and pointed at the man, saying that he had been waiting for an excuse to finally get the chance to cut him down, and he had just presented the perfect opportunity. But just then, 3 figures would begin to appear from the inside of the building, coming out to the courtyard. 2 women and a man with a very scarred face and what seemed to be blinded eyes. He would say to the mysterious person that saved Nezuko, "Yoru, I'm happy to see that you have returned home safely." Immediately all the Hashira saw this man, they would all get on their knees, even with Shinazugawa picking Tanjiro's head and smacking it on the ground to make him prostrate as well, in reverence to this man that just walked in. All of them apart from Yoru. Yoru would still be standing, looking straight at the man. Some of the other Hashira would look to Yoru in a rather disapproving nature, almost as if they were angry that he had not gotten on his knees as well. Yoru would reply by saying, "And here I thought I was the one that was late," before sheathing his blade and then getting on his knees as well. Sanemi would greet the man, calling him master and praying for his good fortune and good health. Then he would bring up the issue of Tanjiro, and he would ask his master if he knew anything about the situation, and if he did, he would ask that he enlighten the rest of the Hashira. That is when the man, who was revealed to be Ubayashiki, the master of the Hashira, would say that he was well aware of Tanjiro's situation, that he had in fact personally sanctioned it, and asked that the other Hashira respect the sanctioning as well. But the general consensus from the Hashira was that they could not accept such a decision. It was too outlandish, too insane. They were demon slayers. They are meant to destroy demons, not walk around with them. Shinazugawa would even go an extra point forward by also saying that he disagreed and actually would ask for Tanjiro along with his sister to be punished. Obunai would also say that, well, how could he ever agree with something like that? He hates demons in the first place. But that is when Yoru would interject by saying, why not? Why in the first place do we even fight against demons? Why do we fight back against them so much? Is it not because of the actions they commit? Is it not because they harm people, innocent people who have done nothing wrong to deserve that harm? And yet I'm here surrounded by people telling you to do the same thing to a little girl who was a victim of an unfortunate situation. If what Kamado is saying is correct, then his sister has done no crime that she needs to be punished of. And neither has he for protecting his own blood. Shinazugawa would scowl at him, but he wouldn't be able to provoke a reaction from Yoru, who was still just staring directly at Ubayashiki. Ubayashiki would then signal for one of the women next to him to read a letter that they had received from a former Hashira, Sakonji Urokodaki. The letter would ask that Tanjiro be allowed to travel with his sister, who had become a demon, but because of how strong her spirit was able to retain her human reasoning. He would also affirm what Tanjiro had been saying about the fact that even in her starved state, Nezuko for the past 2 years has not devoured a single human. It would also go to finally state that if Nezuko were to ever do such a thing, that him, along with the current Water Hashira, Gyuto Miyoka, and Tanjiro, would atone for her crimes with their lives. Even with the profound statement from the former Hashira, Shinazugawa refused to let it go, saying that he couldn't care less if they wanted to sacrifice themselves for her. They still can't guarantee anything, with Rengoku, the flame Hashira, adding that if she were to kill somebody that it would be irreversible, that they can't bring back the dead. Which would lead to their master Ubayashiki saying that they do have a point. They can't prove that Nezuko won't attack anybody. But in that same way, they also cannot prove that she will. For him to simply toss what the former Hashira had said, along with the fact that Nezuko had refrained from eating humans for the past 2 years, he would need a more convincing argument otherwise. Which is then he would also go ahead to reveal that Tanjiro had crossed paths with Muzan, which would lead to all the Hashira having more interest in Tanjiro, asking him about Muzan. What did he look like? What were his abilities, his powers? Did you fight? Things along those lines. Yoru would interject by saying that it's quite funny how the person that you just wanted to kill, along with his little sister, is now the person that you're asking for help in providing you with information. Isn't it so interesting how life works? But before he could say more, Obayashiki would signal for them to be quiet, and there was a complete silence. Obayashiki would state that Muzan has seemed to have a vested interest in Tanjiro because he set pursuers after Tanjiro and Nezuko. That now that he believes Tanjiro or Nezuko, maybe both of them, hold some sort of key to Muzan, and that is something that he does not want to let go. So he would ask again for the Hashira to understand his position, to which Shinazugawa would once again reject. He would go on to talk about how it would be okay if it was a human, but he refuses to just let a demon just live, not after everything the demon slayers have gone through, not after all the lives that were lost. To which Yoru would then say, but the child that you're so intent on killing has nothing to do with those lives that were lost. But Shinazugawa would reply by saying that it was still unacceptable nonetheless. After which he would unsheath his blade, and Yoru would grab the hilt of his, but to everyone's surprise, including Yoru, instead of trying to attack Nezuko, he would cut himself, saying that he would show everyone the sheer ugliness of what a demon really is. He would then stand over Nezuko's box, hovering with his bleeding hand over the box, goading her into trying to eat him. But Nezuko, as she has been doing for the past 2 years, still resisted. Obonai would let him know that they were still in the sunlight, so it wouldn't really matter if she really wanted to eat him or not. That if he really wants to do this, he needs to find some sort of shade. Shinazugawa would then apologize to Obayashiki for his discourtesy, before grabbing the box and jumping inside the building, slamming the box against the wall, which made it crack. He would then poise himself to stab inside Nezuko's box, after which Tanjiro would try to jump and go save his sister, but Obonai would use his elbow to keep him down, pinning him right in a spot where if Tanjiro struggled too much, he could end up killing himself. But the person Obonai really should have tried to restrain was Yoru, because from his kneeling position, he would lunge at the blade, deflecting it, protecting Nezuko from the stab. He would stand in front of Nezuko's box and say, "It seems you also have to be forgiving me as well, master." Shinazugawa would raise his blade and point it at Yoru. Yoru would respond by saying, "I remember you saying something about wanting a chance to cut me down. Here you have it. Here's your chance. Because if you want to touch even a hair on this girl's head, you have to go through me first!" As he would tighten the grip around his blade, Rengoku would stand up and yell at them, asking them if they have no respect for the master. But before he could approach them to try and defuse the fight, Obayashiki would raise up his hand, signaling for Rengoku not to do anything. Shinazugawa would take him up on the offer, lunging straight at him with his sword primed towards his neck, but it would be deflected with grace and ease from Yoru. Shinazugawa would jump back, expecting for Yoru to attack where he was, but he saw that Yoru didn't move. Instead, Yoru held a very relaxed position, holding his katana over his shoulder. Shinazugawa would scowl and say, "Oh, you're trying to screw with me?" After which he would lunge again at Yoru, swinging with more ferocity this time. To which, this time, instead of deflecting, Yoru would dodge. Shinazugawa would swing again, and Yoru would parry again like he did before, and they would begin to have an exchange of sword blows. But none of Shinazugawa's attacks would reach Yoru. They would all be parried left or right, or Yoru would dodge. Their fight would occupy most of the space of the little building, with Yoru having to move around to dodge and parry Sanami's attacks, and Sanami having to move around to lunge and attack Yoru. Sanami would begin to grow more and more annoyed. He was less angry about the fact that he couldn't seem to land a blow on Yoru, but more angry about the fact that Yoru had been defensive this entire time, almost as if he didn't see Sanami as someone worthy to swing his sword upon. And that is when Sanami had a thought. He remembered that every time that Yoru had intervened or Yoru had fought back against him, it was always because he tried to harm Nezuko or tried to stab Nezuko's boss. He would then feint an attack at Yoru, to which Yoru would dodge, but immediately he would move away from Yoru and try and stab Nezuko's box again. But as the sword penetrated through Nezuko's box, not hitting Nezuko yet, Sanemi would feel a foot stomp on the wrist that was holding the katana. He would look up and see that it was Yoru's foot, and then with his other leg, Yoru would use his knee to kick Sanemi right in the nose, causing blood to gush from his nose onto the box and pushing him back in the process. After which, Yoru pointed his blade directly at Sanemi, who had just let go of his after being pushed away. But instead of trying to attack Sanemi or trying to make him submit by putting the blade to his neck or anything, Yoru would sheathe his blade and kick Sanemi's blade towards him. Yoru would then turn to everybody and tell them to take a good look at Nezuko's box. It would then be revealed that all the blood that was gushing from Sanemi's hand after he cut his hand, which should have been flying up and down all around the building, all around the walls, the floors, and the roof, had actually all been on Nezuko's box. Yoru was parrying and dodging Sanemi's strikes in such a way that every time he swung and the blood would splatter, it would land on Nezuko's box, especially on the cracks that were created when Sanemi slammed the box against the wall. Everyone present, Sanemi, Tanjiro, the rest of the Hashira, would be shocked at the revelation, some of them even gasping. Ubayashiki would smile after hearing this, and Yoru would add, "I can't speak for the rest of you, but I have yet to see a single demon who was drenched in this much blood and not go crazed with hunger, and not try to devour a human. What more proof do we still need?" he would say, as he opened the box to reveal Nezuko covered in human blood, but still refusing to partake in devouring of any kind. And with that, Ubayashiki was provided with proof that Nezuko won't be attacking human beings. Ubayashiki would once again use this to reaffirm his position on the matter, and this time the Hashira would accept his decision. He would then give some encouraging words to Tanjiro as he was sent off to the Butterfly Mansion along with the sister for his wounds to be tended to. A disinterested looking Yoru and a scowling Sanemi would then return back to their positions for the real Hashira meeting to begin. The main point of discussion for the meeting was the fact that the demons were now stronger than they've ever been, but also that the current Hashira are the best breathing swordsmen they have ever had since feudal Japan's first breathing style swordsman. After some encouraging words from Ubayashiki would let it be known that he was surprised that Yoru had come back so soon. The expedition that he was sent on should have taken a lot longer than that, but since he has come back, that he had a mission for Rengoku, a very dangerous mission to which he would have preferred to send somebody along with Rengoku, but everybody else already had their own respective missions to deal with. But now that Yoru has returned, there is now another Hashira to send on the mission, so Yoru would not be accompanying Rengoku. Yoru would not shy away from expressing his displeasure at the decision, saying that he just got back from a very tough expedition, but he would agree to go nonetheless. And after some more encouraging words from Ubayashiki, the Hashira would be dismissed. It would be the next day, and Rengoku and Yoru would be gearing up for their mission and about to leave. But they would be approached by Shinobu, who would ask them if they were about to leave. Rengoku would do most of the talking, letting her know about some of the details from the mission, that this seems to be a very dangerous mission, that they've had a lot of rank and file demon slayers go on that mission and go missing, most of them just presumed dead. Rengoku would even say that it might even be a 12 Kizuki, maybe an upper moon. Shinobu would express that that seems very dangerous, but she then looked at Yoru and back at Rengoku before saying that, but if both of them are going, then she feels like she has nothing to worry about. Yoru would yawn before saying that honestly, even if it was just Rengoku, it probably still wouldn't be a problem with how strong he is. Rengoku would give a hearty laugh before thanking Yoru for the flattery, but he would also say that it's quite ironic to hear that coming from Yoru of all people, saying that he thought that he would be the first one to talk about this being overkill with how strong Yoru was. But maybe that's just how strong this demon really is. Then he would begin to laugh some more before saying, well, it is time to set off. But wait, before leaving, he would then turn to Shinobu and ask about Tanjiro, and what she intends to do with him. Shinobu would make a little joke, but then Yoru would turn to her with a serious look and ask her to please take care of Tanjiro and his little sister. But when pressed on why exactly he seemed so interested in them, he simply said that he will explain when he gets back, but please take care of them. He would then turn to Rengoku and say, well, let's get going while the sun's up, and they would both head out, heading straight for the Mugen Train. Everything that happens in the Butterfly Mansion happens the same way it happens in the canon. There's no discrepancies there. But there's a discrepancy, a little bit of a discrepancy, in the meeting that Shinobu had with Ubayashiki. Everything goes exactly as it went, with her also talking about how she prescribed Rengoku's teachings to so maybe Tanjiro might learn a bit more about this fire breathing he described. But then Ubayashiki would smile and say that he finds that very interesting, that his father knew some kind of fire breathing, because Ubayashiki is aware of sun breathing. Ubayashiki would smile before saying, it seems fate is what made you recommend Tanjiro to me for this mission. Thank you for recommending Tanjiro. We will be sending him to the Mugen Train as well. Shinobu would be a little puzzled on what he meant with that first sentence, and she would ask him to clarify, to which Ubayashiki would just smile and say, we'll just have to wait and see. But the real truth behind it was that the person that was accompanying Rengoku happens to be the person who, if Tanjiro really is talking about some sort of sun breathing, the person that is accompanying Rengoku, not Rengoku himself, would be the best person to ask these questions to, that being Yoru, the moon Hashira. Instead of demon slaying or recon for the mission or anything like that, we would actually start with a rather peaceful scene of Rengoku and Yoru eating together in a noodle bar. Yoru would laugh and say that he's actually really happy that of all the people that he could have been stuck on this mission with, that it was Rengoku, because Rengoku always knows where to find the best food. With a bright expression on his face, Rengoku would respond by saying that he might just have a nose for these things, which would make Yoru laugh some more and say that he definitely does, and that they need to go on more missions together if this is the Rengoku mission experience. Just then, a young demon slayer would walk into the room, who was obviously a little shaken up because he was in the presence of two Hashira, but nonetheless he would greet them accordingly, and Rengoku would invite him over to the table, and he would also order the same food they were having for him as well. The young demon slayer would praise them for their work last night for saving a young woman who was attacked by a demon, but Rengoku would simply say that they did not really do much because by the time they got there, the demon had already fled. But the young demon slayer would interject and say that if they hadn't arrived when they did, that the young woman probably wouldn't be alive right now, and that the doctor said that she'll recover fine with no scars, to which Rengoku and Yoru were visibly pleased. Rengoku would inquire of the bar owner on how business was going, trying to strike up casual conversation in a very kind, gentle-hearted way, but the conversation would be anything from casual. It would be very grim because their town had been suffering from a case of serial killings, one after the other. In fact, a conductor was just found dead on his train yesterday. This would spur the young demon slayer to let them know of the reason why he came. He had found the Mugen Train. It was inside a shed of some sort, a train shed of some sort. And at hearing this, Rengoku would smile and get up and begin to leave the noodle bar. Yoru would get up as well, but not before ordering more food from the bar owner and then leaving the noodle bar. The young demon slayer would ask if they were going straight to the Mugen Train, but Rengoku would say that he wanted to investigate the train station where the last conductor was murdered last night. But then Yoru would say that that's perfectly fine. We can just divide and conquer them. He would ask the young demon slayer to just point him in the general direction of the shed and that he'll do the rest and he'll fight it himself. Now the young demon slayer found it a little perplexing to believe that he could just point him in the general direction and he would just find it, but who was he to question a direct order given to him by a Hashira? So he would point Yoru in the general direction of the train shed and then Yoru would head off on his way. Everything that happened between Rengoku, the young demon slayer, and the people inside the train station would happen the same way as in the anime. Rengoku would meet the people selling the bento boxes, he would buy the mental boxes from them. He would get the paste bud in his face and all that. But yeah, all that happens the same way. But on Yoru's end, Yoru, while heading towards the train shed, would actually be thinking about what happened at the Hashira meeting. He would be thinking primarily about Tanjiro and Nezuko, which is when we would get a flashback to 8 years prior to a young 12-year-old Yoru wandering about the snowy mountains, seemingly lost, only to come across a man wearing what happens to be orange and black kaori. And as he looked up, that man was a man we all know as Tanjiro Kamado, Tanjiro and Nezuko's father. He would have memories of being taken into his home, of being taken care of being fed, being given drink. He would have memories of the children in that home, but they always used to be just blurry images because it happened a long time ago and he couldn't really recall them properly. But after what happened at the Hashira meeting, two faces in that memory begin to clear up, Nezuko and Tanjiro's faces. And then the scene would shift to an 18-year-old Yoru revisiting the location but finding nobody there. Then the scene would shift back to the current time where Yoru was heading back to the train shed. He would begin to think to himself and contemplate on the chances that he would run into the children of the person that saved his life all those years ago. But then he would become a lot more solemn when he remembered exactly what became of that family. But then that is when he would snap out of it and tell himself that it's not time to think about that. He needs to focus on the mission. And in an attempt to push down those thoughts even further, he would crack open the takeout box he had bought from the noodle bar and begin to eat. And his thoughts were quickly consumed with just how delicious that food was. His pace began to quicken as he finished the food and tossed the box to the side, blitzing right past a train that seemed to be heading in the same direction. A train that, unknown to him, was housing Rengoku, who was also heading to the train shed. He would eventually arrive at the shed long before that train would have ever gotten there, and he would head inside to go look for the Mugen Train. He would look for a while, but to no avail, because he would come to realize that there was no train in the train shed. He could not find the Mugen Train. But then one of the train conductors would walk in and ask Yoru what he was doing there. Yoru would casually tell a random lie about being part of some kind of authorities or police or whatever, and say that he was looking for the Mugen Train. To which the conductor would tell him that the Mugen Train isn't here. It had been taken into maintenance quite a while ago. Which is when Yoru would sigh and complain about how far he had to run and how fast he ran to get here. He then asked if the conductor would mind pointing him in the general direction of the maintenance building, but the conductor did him one better. He showed him a map. After 2 minutes of looking at the map, Yoru would finally get the location in his head, and he was about to head off before the conductor would ask him to wait a second, but by the time he turned to look at Yoru, he had already left the building. We now pan to Yoru running right down to the direction where the maintenance building was. His nose then twitched. Something was off. He could feel it. He knew exactly what this feeling was. It's a demon. As the maintenance building finally came into view for him, the feeling that he felt before got stronger and stronger, and he would squint to see if he could make out what was happening through the windows, which was when he would see Rengoku, who had his blade unsheathed, pointing it towards something. And once he looked at the thing that he was pointing the blade towards, he would notice a demon holding a human hostage. His face would then don a more serious look. Yoru was aware of how far away he was from the building. If something were to happen, he most likely wouldn't reach in time at this pace, which is when he would close his eyes and begin to take very deep breaths before saying in his head, "Total concentration." And as he said this, his pace, his strides would quicken, blitzing at strides thought impossible for human beings to achieve. The scene would then shift to inside the maintenance building, with Rengoku pointing his sword at the demon who held the hostage. The demon would try to brag about his speed, saying that a human could never reach him, demon slayer or not. He would move around and taunt Rengoku and say that if Rengoku is really a demon slayer, then shouldn't it be his job to cut his head off? Because if he doesn't take his head off, then this human that he's holding in his hand will be the one that's headless very soon. Rengoku would have a stern look on his face, but he did not swing at the demon. for fear of hitting the human in the process. He was stuck between a rock and a hard place, without much else to do but to wait for the right opportunity. But just then, as if from God himself, the opportunity Rengoku was praying for had shown itself. He would begin to see something coming towards the window that the demon was standing in front of at breakneck speeds, and Rengoku knew exactly what, or should I say, who that was. He would begin to smile, and the demon would take offense to this, asking if Rengoku has lost his mind or if he forgot that he's holding somebody hostage right now. And then Rengoku would keep the smile going and say no, that he's perfectly fine. He's just relieved. And the demon would ask him, what do you mean by you're relieved? You haven't stopped anything. I killed somebody just last night. I am going to kill this person I'm holding right in front of you. And those bento boxes, I actually do remember who those bento boxes were being sold by. And I'm going to kill them too once I get out of there. And then Rengoku would actually laugh a bit. And then he would say, that's kind of funny. You actually think that you're gonna make it out of this building alive. And the demon would grimace at this and he would get angry, and because of that anger, he would turn his attention to the grip he had on the hostage's chest. He would then squeeze it as if to rip his heart out, but that was exactly what Rengoku was waiting for. In an instant, Rengoku would blaze forward, slicing off both of the hands of the demon, releasing the hostage entirely. The demon, bewildered, would immediately try to make an escape, but before he could do anything, he would be perplexed by hearing the window behind him shatter. He would instinctively turn to try and see what was coming at him, but it was too late. Before he even realized what was happening, his head was flying off its body. The world would begin to turn upside down for him as his head fell to the floor and his body fell on the opposite side of it. And the last thing that he saw before he completely fading from this world was Yoru cleaning the blood off his blade. Rengoku would applaud Yoru, saying that he always knows how to make an entrance, to which Yoru would sigh and just say that he's just happy that all of them are okay. Or at least he thinks they're okay. Were there any casualties? And then Rengoku would then look at the person that was being held hostage and say no casualties. Some injuries though, but he'll be fine. Rengoku and Yoru would tend to the wounded man for a while, before the demon slayers would come in and take him to go get treated properly. Later that night, Rengoku, Yoru, and the young demon slayer from the beginning would reconvene together at the same noodle bar. The young demon slayer would express his gratitude and thanks, saying that all's well that ends well, thinking that the mission was complete. But then Rengoku and Yoru would look at each other and then look back at the young demon slayer, before letting him know that that was just the tip of the iceberg. That demon was only a distraction. The demon slayer would be shocked at the revelation. He would inquire how they are so sure of this, to which Rengoku would simply reply that that demon that Yoru killed was nowhere near as powerful to eat 40 humans all at once. What they are chasing down is something way stronger and more powerful than that. The demon slayer would look dejected after hearing this, thinking that all his investigation was for nothing. But as when Rengoku would let him know that no, there's no need for more investigation. The Mugen Train will be running again tomorrow, and tomorrow night, him and Yoru will board the train and deal with the demon personally. After which Yoru would yawn and agree with Rengoku, saying that he hopes that they'll be done in time to still get one more meal from the noodle bar, before ordering once again for more food from the owner, to which the owner would happily serve them. It would be the next night, with Rengoku and Yoru buying their tickets for the Mugen Train and getting ready to get on. But right then, Rengoku and Yoru would have a conversation. Yoru would remember Rengoku talking about how the slasher demon was a distraction, to which he would agree. But then he would ask that are they sure he was the only demon there, the only distraction? He wouldn't want them to both leave, and then another demon would show up and wreak more havoc on this town. Rengoku would ponder on this, and then he would remember how they were talking about how this mission is a bit overkill for both of them to be going on this train. He would then say that, well, there's a very good way to satiate that concern. They could split up. One of them could stay back and the other would be on the train. The one on the train would investigate as they were supposed to do, while the other one that stayed back would patrol the city for a while, checking for any demon attacks or any clues that they might have missed while they were out yesterday dealing with that other demon. And then Yoru would add to this by saying, and once that's done, the Hashira that stayed back could get on the Kage train, which seemed to be going on the same route as the Mugen Train just a little bit later, and then group back up with the Hashira on the Mugen Train, to which they both agreed with smiles on their faces. But then the question arose, who would stay back and who would go? Yoru was a bit puzzled at this, and honestly, he was content to deciding with a coin flip or maybe a game of rock, paper, scissors. To which Rengoku would just say that Yoru should stay and he should go, because Yoru is a lot better with logistics and the more overall investigative stuff, or Rengoku feels like he's just more suited for battle. To which Yoru would have no issues with this. Rengoku would get on the train, Yoru would wave to him before leaving to go patrol the town. Now, everything that happened in the Mugen Train arc movie would happen the same way. You would have Zenitsu, Tanjiro, Inosuke, and Nezuko meeting the Flame Hashira Rengoku on the train. Rengoku would slightly mention that there was somebody else with him, but he didn't mention exactly who it was. He just alluded to the fact that there was somebody else that was going to be joining him soon. So yeah, everything would happen the same way. They would all be put to sleep and they would all break out of their forced dreams. They would fight Enmu and the whole train would derail and all that. And while this was happening, Yoru would be in the town looking through the missing posters, looking for clues, patrolling the city to see if there was any demon activity going on, but he would find nothing. He would be a little bit dejected at the fact that he found nothing, because it would dawn to him that means that he had basically left Rengoku for no good reason. But then he was still confident in Rengoku's abilities. I mean, he has seen Rengoku fight before. He's one hell of a Hashira. It would take a really strong demon, and I mean an upper moon type demon, to really bring Rengoku down, to which he didn't feel like 40 people dying at once, as horrible as that was. He didn't feel like that was upper moon activity. Immediately he concluded his activities in the town, he would quickly return back to the station, only to see the Kage train already taking off, to which, without buying a ticket, he would quickly run to the train, jumping and catching one of the railings on it. He would then jump to the roof and be content to stay there so that he would see the Mugen Train from farther ahead. So as the Kage train was progressing, he was kind of beginning to get uneasy feelings. Something was wrong and he could feel it, which was then he began to smell smoke. He would get to the front of the Kage train and squint his eyes in the direction that the Mugen Train was supposed to have headed, which was when he got his first glimpse of something. A derailed train car. Immediately, he would activate total concentration breathing and blast right off the train, intending to run there instead, heading towards the crash site. His mind would begin to race with thoughts, thinking of what would happen if Rengoku was dead, praying that Rengoku was still alive, that he was still kicking. He would begin to feel slightly guilty because he would start to think that Rengoku was dead, and if Rengoku was dead, then he would blame himself, because had he been there, he would have probably been able to help. As he got closer to the crash site, he began to see a clearing to which he could hear clashes of what sounded like two very powerful forces. He had determined that one of them had to be Rengoku. Rengoku still had to be alive. And as he finally got into the clearing, he could see what looked to be a final clash between Rengoku and something on the other side, which he presumed to be the demon responsible for the 40 killings. He noticed that Rengoku was beaten and injured badly. Yoru would blitz towards the demon as well, and as the demon's fist was about to protrude right through Rengoku's stomach, he would feel another blade from the other side trying to cut through his neck, to which the demon would bounce back, jumping away from the blade and Rengoku at the same time before he could land the finishing blow on Rengoku. Rengoku would huff and puff and have a mix of joy, excitement, surprise, and relief as he saw Yoru. But just then, his knees would buckle and give way as he began to fall to the ground, to which Yoru would hold him and grab him. He would let him down, put him down on the ground easily. He would then look towards the demon that Rengoku was fighting, who seemed to have a smile on his face, licking the blood off his hands. He would then ask Rengoku if he could use recovery breathing, to which Rengoku would nod and say that he's not gonna die yet, that he's still got some fight left in him. Yoru would then reply that if he has some fight left in him, that he should use all that fight he has and channel it into recovery breathing to make sure that he doesn't die. Yoru would then stand up and turn around to face the demon, and he would say that he would take it from here. But another surprise was awaiting him. He would see Tanjiro, Nezuko, and 2 other demon slayers that he hadn't met before. They would all run to Rengoku's side, to which Yoru would warn them to be careful and that Rengoku was seriously hurt, and that any imbalance could be the difference between life and death for him. Tanjiro would look away from Rengoku and look at Yoru in shock, not expecting him to be here. He would then ask what he was doing here, and then Yoru would clarify that he was accompanying Rengoku on this mission, after which he would ask for a situation report. He would find out from Zenitsu that Rengoku had not allowed a single person out of the 200 passengers on this train to die. Yoru would then turn to Rengoku and say, "Yup, that's definitely Kyojiro for you. A miracle worker through and through." But that is when the demon that had been pushed back would cut through the discussion, asking if he could get back to his fight, because it was such a fun fight. Yoru would glance at the demon with a side eye, before talking back to Tanjiro, saying that they would continue their discussion later. He would then turn fully to the demon once again, but this time would ask his name. The demon would refuse on account of the demon not even thinking that Yoru was strong in the first place. What would be the point of telling him his name? He can't even sense any fighting spirit from him. That if he knows what's good for him, he should let that flame Hashira behind him finish this fight, and then maybe he'll just let the rest of them live. Tanjiro would then call out to Yoru, telling him to be careful, that that's Upper Moon 3. Yoru wouldn't say anything back to Tanjiro, but then he would address the demon again, saying that if he doesn't tell him his name, he'll just address him as Moon 3. He didn't even know that there were still ranks even in the upper moons. It's kinda ridiculous if you ask me, Yoru would say. The demon would tell him to watch his tongue before he loses it, and then Yoru would just yawn as if he was disinterested by the threat. But after the yawn, with a more serious look, Yoru would ask him if he was responsible for what happened to that train. The demon would laugh and say no, that was a different demon and he doesn't want to take credit for that. Yoru would then ask them what was the demon even doing here to begin with, to which the demon would sigh and say, well, reasons don't really matter. I knew that there was somebody strong here, and I came to do what I do best. Yoru's countenance would change to a bit of an angered one, as he would say, and I assume that means killing the man behind me. You know, this is the biggest problem I have with you demons. Without rhyme, without reason, you kill for killing's sake. What exactly do lives mean to you? And as if on some sort of cue, a memory, not Akaza's own, but a memory would just flood in his head. He would be away from the Mugen Train, and instead he would see a man that we all know to be Yoriichi Sugikuni, saying the exact same things. The demon would then snap out of it before grabbing his head and grunting, asking himself what this memory was. He doesn't know that person. Wait, was it a memory of Lord Muzan's? Does Lord Muzan know this man or something? But then he would snap out of that as well, with an angry expression on his face. Akaza would push back his fist before saying, I warned you. Destructive death. Air type. And he would punch the air. But then a shockwave would blast to exactly where Yoru's head was. But then the smoke and dust would clear to reveal Yoru with his neck slightly bent, showing that he had dodged the attack by simply just moving his neck a little. Akaza would be shocked by what he saw as the smoke and dust cleared. He would mutter under his breath, Kokushibo? No, that's a human. How does that human look exactly like? And as he was thinking this, he would see the image of Kokushibo in his head, but then that image would contort into the image of Yoriichi as well, before snapping back to reality. The demon would begin to think that his mind was playing tricks on him. The demon would out of the blue ask for Yoru's name, and after a bit of contemplation, Yoru would then give it, saying that his name was Yoru Sugikuni, the Moon Hashira. Immediately he said that something would irk Akaza. He would think to himself, that name, that face. Why does that face make my skin crawl? Why does that name make me want to just not be here? Yoru would then call out and say that if Akaza is done daydreaming, he'd like to take his head now. The demon would still be deep in thought, thinking that is it because he took so much of Muzan's blood? But in the end, it doesn't even matter. He's still human, no matter what he looks like. He's going to kill him like all the rest. He would then enter a fighting stance before saying, "Compass needle," and a compass would appear on the ground. Normally, this is how he would gauge the strength of his opponents, by seeing how strong they are from what their fighting spirit looks like. But once again, he couldn't see any fighting spirit from Yoru, which would make him hesitate a bit. But then Yoru would taunt him saying, "Come on, we don't have all day here." Which is when he would lunge at Yoru, dashing at breakneck speeds with a fist aimed right for his nose. Which is when Yoru would take a breath and position himself in a fighting stance of his own before saying, "Moon breathing, evening." And before he finished the sentence, as the swing was about to happen, Akaza would see flashing images of Yoruichi and Kokushibo, both swinging their swords, and all those images told him was death. As on instinct, Akaza would dodge away, and the swing would happen as Yoru would say, "Palace!" He would slash exactly where Akaza's neck would have been had Akaza actually gone forward with his attack. Yoru would look up from his slashing position and wonder, he dodged? Okay, let's try this then. And as he said that, as if he was able to flash step, he would appear right in front of Akaza with his blade aiming up, and Akaza would try to counter the sword, but before he knew it, both his wrists were slashed right off. But due to Akaza's insane regeneration speed, his hands would grow back immediately in a perfect position to grab Yoru by the throat, and he would attempt to do just that, but before his hands could even touch him, the blade that had gone up would come down and up again multiple times, slicing Akaza's fingers and his forearms as if they were pieces of sushi. As the next one would go for his knee, Akaza would be able to dodge around the blade, getting some more space and regrowing all his limbs. He would still be panting, not because he was already tired, but because it was more like he was fighting 3 people at once. Akaza's mind wasn't all the way there. Because of his experiences with fighting Kokushibo, trying to challenge him and losing horribly, and whatever was going on with Muzan's side of his memories, he couldn't properly focus on the fight. Tanjiro would say from the back, in shock and awe, that he would praise Yoru, saying he's actually pushing him back. But Rengoku would look in a more concerned manner, more confused. He would think to himself, that demon, why is his fighting so disorganized in comparison to what it was before? It's almost like something is hindering him from fighting Yoru the way he was just fighting me. And that is when Akaza would scream at the top of his lungs, as if trying to be rid of all the hindrances in his mind, screaming to himself that he is a warrior, that he would not allow some kind of mental destabilization to make him lose this fight. And that is when he would begin to lock in on Yoru once again, to which Yoru would then smile and say, "Oh, it looks like you're finally ready to fight." He would then growl as he lunged in at Yoru, and Yoru would position his blade to block his attack. They would begin to have a parlay of sword strikes and blows, Akaza not being able to land a blow on Yoru, while Yoru's attacks also being parried by Akaza's fists. As their parlay was going on, Yoru would say to Akaza that he hopes that this is the fight Akaza wanted. He seems to have really been enthralled by the idea of enjoying a good fight, because this is the last fight he's ever going to fight. To which Akaza would scoff and say that if he really thinks he can kill him, that he has another thing coming, and that he should give it his best shot then! Yoru would think about that sentence for a second before dodging Akaza's next attack. He would go down, lift his leg up, and kick off Akaza's chest to backflip away from him. Yoru would land on his feet and cock his blade in a rather unorthodox fashion before saying, "You know what? Sure, I'll take you up on that offer. Just make sure you don't run again." But before he could do anything, Akaza would jump into the air and say destructive death, air type, and begin to launch a barrage of shockwave attacks at Yoru. But Yoru, instead of deflecting or blocking the attacks, he would begin to dodge and move closer to Akaza, running right through the attacks. He would dodge and dodge and dodge, and Akaza would punch harder and punch faster, trying to land a single blow on Yoru, but his speed would just be incomprehensible, moving faster than any Hashira Akaza's ever fought before. Akaza would begin to get worried as he was sending the attacks out, thinking that there's no way this person can be a human. There's no way a human is moving like this. But then, before he could even react, before he even noticed it, Yoru was already right in front of him in the range of a sword strike. And that is when Yoru would say, "Moon breathing, first form, Evening Palace." And immediately he said this, the fighting spirit Akaza didn't see before erupted almost like a volcano. All Akaza could see in that moment was his head being decapitated, but he wouldn't stand for that. Akaza would be able to find a way to jump back a little bit, trying to dodge with a backflip, but as he dodged, his entire lower section would be severed from his torso up. Now, due to his fast regeneration, Akaza will be able to regenerate his entire lower section mid-air, but not without having a shaky landing, not without being shaken up by what had just occurred. What he saw, if he hadn't jumped back at that exact moment, Akaza knew that he could have just died there. But that only served to make him angrier. He would lunge at breakneck speeds toward Yoru, to which Yoru tried to dodge again, but to Yoru's surprise, it would be a lot faster than before, so he would actually have to put up his sword to make space between Akaza's fist and Yoru's face. Yoru would then push Akaza to the side and jump to the other side himself, but Akaza wasn't done. Immediately he would try and land a spinning back heel kick on Yoru, to which Yoru would dodge, and to punish, he would slice Akaza's leg from the knee down, just clean, but the leg would grow back, and he would kick Yoru with the other leg, to which Yoru would dodge again and slice that one off, but again it would regenerate, and once again their parley would continue, but this time Yoru was landing his attacks, with Akaza's body parts being sliced off, but them just regenerating much faster than they were before. Tanjiro would look worried, saying that even if Yoru can keep up, his stamina is going to run out before Akaza does. And after a bit of flying limbs and countered strikes, they would push away from each other once again. Yoru would pant a little bit, and Akaza would simply have an angry expression on his face, but it would begin to calm as he began to say to himself, "Yeah, he is just a human after all. Doesn't matter how strong you are. The fact that you're human will always be a weakness. You can't beat me, regardless of whatever you look like." And that is when Yoru would spit on the floor before saying, "I don't know. I think being human is pretty cool. Growing old, having family, love, eating amazing food. Oh, and I can walk out in the sunlight, by the way. Can you do that? And since we're insulting each other now, there's something I also noticed. I was trying to be courteous before, but since we're here now, I just want to ask, Mr. Warrior, correct me if I'm wrong, but it does seem that you are quite scared. Don't tell me you're afraid of little old me now." There would be a silence that would fill the air, and the atmosphere would get cold. Akaza would not answer. His spirit had been insulted. Him, a warrior, scared of a fight. He wouldn't say anything in response, but he would only assume a different fighting position and say, "Destructive death. Disorder!" Dashing at Yoru with multiple huge attacks heading right his way. Rengoku and Tanjiro would yell at Yoru to be careful, but Yoru would just lift up his blade and say, "Moon breathing, sixth form. Perpetual night, lonely moon," as he would slice forth with multiple moon-shaped slices, clashing with Akaza's disorder attack. Akaza would lose sight of Yoru for a second, to which Yoru would move to his back and say, "Moon breathing, second form, per flower moon gazing," to which he would dash from behind Akaza, and Akaza would turn around, but it would be too late. all of his limbs would get slashed clean off from his arms to his legs, and then the sword would swing back to his neck. And as he looked at the sword swing back to his neck, once again his vision would shift. Instead of Yoru, he would see Yoruichi swinging at his neck, to which instinctively Akaza's body would regenerate and twirl in a very awkward position to avoid the sword slash, jumping far away from Yoru. Yoru would fall back down to the ground, and then he would stand back up, but with a rather angry look on his face. "You are scared," he would say. He would then say, "No, you don't get to be scared. You don't get to be afraid of what's coming to you. After everything you've done to get to where you are, look at how strong you are. I'm sure there's hundreds of people you've eaten, hundreds of lives you've ruined, families you turned apart. You don't get to feel fear anymore, demon. You don't have the right to," as he would lunge right at Akaza, and this time would be a lot more different than the rest of his other attacks. This time, Yoru would move with a blistering speed, and Tanjiro's eyes would widen as he saw something. The movements Yoru was making, Tanjiro recognized those movements. Akaza would jump back and use his air type to try and slow Yoru down, blast him away. At this point in time, it was less of a decision and more of a bodily instinct. All the senses in Akaza's body was telling him to flee, run. It was almost like he wasn't in control of himself. He was just trying to do his best to not get killed by Yoru. But Yoru would weave through the attacks, move forward. He would slash, Akaza would dodge. He would slash again, Akaza would dodge again, but Yoru would still be on him, giving him no room to breathe. He would slash again, and this time cutting up Akaza's legs, but he would regrow them and flee into the forest. And while that was happening, Tanjiro looking at Yoru, seeing Yoru fight, all Tanjiro could see was sun-breathing attacks that he would use. As Yoru closed in, he would grip his blade tight before saying, "Moon breathing, 12th form, lunar dragon dance!" And as Tanjiro saw this attack, he would just mutter under his breath, the Hinokami Kagura? As Akaza's body kept moving, in his mind, he would yell, "No, stop running! I am not a coward! You worthless body, listen to me!" But it was to no avail, because the body kept moving. It ventured into the woods, and Yoru was right behind him, was going into the woods right behind him, yelling that there is no place that you're going to run that I will not find you. Akaza would then get another Muzan memory of Yoruichi saying the same thing, and finally finishing with, "I will hunt you down to the ends of the earth," which made his body move even faster. He even punched the ground so hard that a shockwave would blast Yoru back as well as Akaza forward and create a diversion for him to finally escape. As he got farther and farther, Akaza would then cock his hand back and punch so hard on his knees that they would crumble in on themselves, making him stop by force. He would then take deep breaths. He would be down on his knees. He would punch the ground in frustration. Me, Upper Moon 3, ran away from a fight? No, this is not Lord Muzan's body. It is mine. I will not flee. I am a warrior. All these years, the centuries, all this time I've spent was to become strong. Not so I could be a coward, but to prove myself the strongest to ever exist. I will not be hindered by something so inane. But as he was screaming to himself, cursing the heavens and all that, he would notice a figure standing right beside him. The first thing he would see was Kokushibo, eyes wide, looking right at him, saying the words, "Pathetic." Akaza would turn in anger, confusion, rage, and then he would see Yoruichi moving towards him in a slashing position. Yoruichi would say pathetic as well. And then he would finally see Yoru lunging right at him, who would also say, "You're pathetic," as he would stab right through Akaza's left
eye, penetrating his skull, but he was not done. He would grab Akaza's shirt, grab the hilt of the sword, and throw Akaza back into the clearing where they were fighting earlier. Akaza would fly, smacking against the wall, falling right down to the ground as Yoru would come from the sky, slashing down, but Akaza would dodge to the right and kick at Yoru, and this time the kick would finally land on Yoru's side, pushing him back. Akaza would grip his hands. He would feel that his hands, his feet, his legs were his own again. He would look at Yoru with disdain and he would growl. He would say, "You know what? This is a blessing. You wanted my name, right? It's Akaza. Sorry for being rude earlier. This is the fight I've been looking for. And there's no way, Lord Muzan or not, I am going to let him interfere with something like this." As his aura grew more destructive and more dangerous and larger, Yoru would enter a serious fighting stance because he could feel it. Something had changed. Whatever was hindering this monster before, it's gone now. Whatever I thought was going on before, looks like that demon has gotten over it. It's about to come at me with full power. On Upper Moon 3, huh? Let's do this! Akaza would then lunge at Yoru with killer intent like never before. Yoru would use his moon-breathing sixth form again and slash Akaza into 3 separate vertical pieces, but almost as if he was unfazed. Akaza's body would reattach itself. He would enter a swinging kick formation. Yoru would block the kick, but the force of it would push him back, and while it pushed him back, Akaza would use the opportunity and leap at him and punch down on the ground, saying 10,000 leaves, flashing willow. The impact would destroy the ground under Yoru. Yoru was about to fall through the ground, but before he did, he would jump up and use the debris to jump up into the air. But Akaza would do the same thing, lunging straight at Yoru, and this time he would feint the attack and end up punching Yoru right in the side, which would make Yoru cough out blood, but he would use the blood to his advantage. He would spit the blood in Akaza's eyes before slashing out his eyes, and he would attempt to slash down on Akaza's neck, but even without the eyes, Akaza would be able to dodge the attack, instead reversing it on Yoru, swinging the back of his heel on the back of Yoru's neck. So in order to defend, Yoru would have to slash his knee off, and he did just that, using Evening Palace to slash his knee and jumping away from Akaza. Yoru would look disheveled and tired, panting, and Akaza would funny enough look the same way, but it would only be for a second. He would immediately regain himself, running straight down on Yoru. He would feint an attack, but at which Yoru took the bait for and used his crown splitter, a kick right to the jaw. But Yoru would be able to put his sword down to at least block the kick, but it would still take him up, and Akaza would combo it into his flurry of explosive kicks. And while he was kicking, thinking he was hitting something, Yoru would come from behind, showing that he had actually dodged the attack, and cut Akaza's feet clean off before stabbing him in the chest and dragging him across the ground and slamming him into a wall. He would then dash towards the wall trying to decapitate Akaza, but Akaza would move out the way before trying to retaliate with a blow of his own. But Yoru would parry the attack, and once again, they would have another parley of sword strikes, parries, strikes, punches, blows, attacks. But it became ever more evident that Akaza was getting the upper hand on him. Like Tanjiro had feared, Yoru's stamina would begin to decrease. "What's wrong, Moon Hashira? For I thought you were going to kill me," Akaza would say, swinging at Yoru again, but Yoru would dodge, this time flipping over the hand, about to slash his neck, but Akaza would grab the blade and instead slam Yoru to a wall. And as Yoru hit the wall, he would cough up more blood, and Akaza was about to bash his face into the wall, but Yoru would use moon-breathing second form to slash both his arms off and push away from him. Yoru began to think, if I don't end this now, there won't be a later. I need to do something about this guy. Upfront attacks don't look like they're gonna work anymore. Think he might have awakened or something. Dang it. I could try. I have a No, it'll have to work. It will have to do.
Yoru would then begin to breathe. He would put his fingers on his blade, take deep breaths, and then say, "This one's a Yoru original."
Moon breathing. Mirage of the eclipse.
But he wouldn't strike or anything like that. Akaza would blink and everything would go black for a second. But when he opened his eyes, everything would be fine. Yoru would still be standing there. He would then say, "At that attack that you were about to use on Rengoku,
use it on me."
Akaza would look. He would laugh and then say, "You know what?
Sure, who am I to stand against how a man wishes to die?
And you know what? I never did apologize. As his aura grew more dangerous and wilder, I called you weak.
You are anything but weak. You are the greatest fight I've ever had, Yorusuke Kuni!"
And he lunged forward, screaming annihilation as he came with a monstrous attack, hurling towards Yoru. Then Goku and Tanjiro would look out in desperation, screaming that he needs to dodge, do something, get out the way. But Yoru, instead of doing any of that, would lunge straight at the attack and say,
"Moon breathing. Advent of the man-eating monster!"
And to Akaza's eyes, what would look like two crescent moon slashes would then begin to look like jaws with jagged teeth about to devour him. But he didn't care. He was going for the kill. All he could think about was winning this fight and killing Yoru. He would go straight for the kill. And as his fist was about to go right through Yoru's stomach, it would do just that. It would penetrate. Akaza would smile, but he wouldn't feel anything. What was going on, he would think. He would then blink and see that there was nothing in front of him. But all he would feel next was cold steel piercing through his nape to the front of his neck. Yoru would be upside down behind him, piercing through his nape. Akaza would try to grab for the blade to make sure he doesn't get decapitated, but it was already too late. Yoru would scream at the top of his voice, "Moon breathing, 11th form, midnight sky!" And a circular full moon slash would occur, taking Akaza's head clean off its body. Tanjiro would see this and could only think of his sun-breathing, clear blue sky. He would stand up and say, "The person he's been searching for, the person who might have answers, it's him." Yoru would land on the ground in a superhero type pose with a victorious look on his face, huffing and puffing, panting, as he had believed that it was finally over. He had not looked back. He had only looked up, resting on his blade. But then he would hear Rengoku call out his name. He would hear Tanjiro, Inosuke, and Zenitsu yell, and he would turn to see Akaza's body moving towards them. He would turn to see Akaza's head still on the floor, still looking at Yoru in disdain. Yoru was perplexed. He didn't know what was going on, but he knew that he wasn't going to let them die. The body would be going towards Rengoku, and Akaza's head would yell in a berserker fashion, "Flying planet, 1,000 wheels!" It would be an upward kick, attempting to take the head right off Rengoku's head. But as it was about to land, Yoru would get in the middle, taking the brunt of the assault. It would crack his ribs, maybe even shatter them. He would cough up blood onto the leg as he was sent up. But the body was not done. The head would yell, "8-layer demon core!" But Yoru would bounce back down, coughing blood, yelling, "Moon breathing, 2nd form, pearl flower moon gazing!" deflecting all the attacks. And then Akaza's head would scream, "This is the end for all of you!" And he would then yell at the top of his lungs, "Destructive death, final form, blue silver chaotic afterglow!" And Yoru would see attacks coming at them from all sides, an omnidirectional attack. Rengoku was in no shape to fight. Those kids wouldn't be able to stand a single one of his attacks. He wouldn't be able to save everybody like this.
he might not be able to save himself. Not unless he would throw away his Haori that had been torn in the fight, and he would reveal a second blade. He would grab the blade, he would breathe hard and say total concentration as the shockwave attacks were about to hit them. Moon he would begin to cough up blood as he said this, but he would not relent. His veins would bulge, his muscles would tense, his eyes would become bloodshot red. He would say again, even with the blood leaking from his nose, leaking from his mouth, Moon breathing, fifth form, Moon Spirit's Calamitous Eddy! He would begin to swing the katanas wildly in ways that Tanjiro had not even thought that human beings could swing and bend their swords. At speeds unknown to him, it would create a vortex of crescent moon blades surrounding them, blocking against all of the shockwave attacks that were coming from all directions. But even at that, some of them got through. One was about to hit Tanjiro right in the head, but Yoru would move to take the hit directly on his abdomen. One was about to hit Rengoku in the face. Yoru would move to take that one on his shoulder. He would be taking all the attacks that would get through, and Yoru would say, come on, buddy, don't fail me now. If some of these attacks are getting through, it's not the technique, it's me. I need to move quicker, swing harder, faster, more swings, more swings. Both of his pupils would white out as he would swing faster and harder. It would look like the swords are basically becoming one with the slashes. Tanjiro's eyes, Inosuke's eyes, and Zenitsu's eyes couldn't keep up at all, and Rengoku's eyes could barely keep up. It was like the swords were vanishing because of how fast he was moving them. And finally, every single hit from Akaza was being blocked. None were getting through. And he would yell, he would scream as he was deflecting the attacks. And finally the attacks would stop, and so would he. He would fall on his knees, coughing up blood, spitting on the floor, because he would be ragged, tired, which is when he would see Upper Moon 3, Akaza's body, the same way, also tired, also in disbelief of how he was still able to survive that. But it was still a demon body. It would quickly regain itself in attempts to finish the job, but Akaza had lost track of time. His head on the floor would look to the side. The sun was coming up. His body would instinctively turn and try to run for cover. Yoru would try to get to the body and stop it, but he wouldn't be able to move. He would get up and his entire body would wince in pain and he would fall to the floor. Inosuke and Zenitsu would grab him, trying to get him up, and Akaza's body would begin to run for the woods, run to safety. But behind Yoru, Tanjiro would jump up. He would have his blade in hand. He would feel like flames were breathing right from his mouth as he threw his sword like a javelin right through the knee of Akaza's body, pinning the knee to the ground. Now Akaza's body, being Akaza, would still be able to rip his leg right out, but the time he had taken to slow him down was enough. Rengoku and Yoru would use all the remaining strength left in their bodies and lunge after the body with their swords, pinning it to the ground. The body would kick off, try to get off, and they would eventually get free, but only because they allowed it. They would lift it up by themselves, pushing it up, and both of them will begin to swing wildly on the body, slicing it into bits and pieces as the sun came up like sushi. Yoru would look to the head, which seemed to be trying to move away. He would use his second sword and throw it right down on the head, keeping it in place. As the sun came up, the pieces of the body would try to mend together, but it was too late. It was beginning to burn away. The head would yell, "No! No!" But as the body burns away, it would begin to curse under its breath. No, how did I lose? This guy, the Moon Hashira, is a monster. He would then look down in a more solemn nature, seeming to finally come to terms with his death, and then as his head would begin to burn away, he would say, "My one regret that I still have is that I couldn't kill that bastard, Doma." Ugh. Yoru would walk towards the head that was burning away. With little but the mouth left, it would then say that Hashira, Yoru, kill Doma. Kill, but Yoru would not care. Yoru would lift up the remainder of the skull by the sword and slice it in half as it burnt away. Yoru would then say, what do I look like? Heeding the final wishes of something like you. Yoru would then fall right to the floor and pass out unconscious.
Our story continues with our heroes surrounding the unconscious body of Yoru, all apart from Nezuko, who was equally as worried but due to it being daytime had to stay in her box for her own safety. Tanjiro's eyes would begin to tear up, fearing the worst had happened, but just then, Yoru's eyes would slowly open. His vision would be blurry, but Yoru would begin to come to. His mouth would slowly open before saying, "What's wrong? Y'all look like somebody died." Their faces would light up upon hearing his voice, and Tanjiro would suddenly hug him. This would take Yoru by surprise at first, but he would just smile before letting Tanjiro know that he was squeezing one of his many broken ribs. Tanjiro would promptly release him before apologizing, but Yoru would smile and tell him to relax and that it was fine. Tanjiro would immediately want to ask him questions relating to his breathing techniques and why the movements felt so similar to the Hinokami Kagura, but not right now. They were in no shape for him to be pestering them with questions right now. Tanjiro would express his happiness at the fact that all of them survived. Zenitsu would do the same, albeit through tears and cries of terror. Inosuke would do so as well, in his own boorish Inosuke manner, but the sentiment would be understood all the same. Rengoku would chuckle before letting out a sigh of relief, before laying down on the ground and saying thank goodness they all survived. He would then turn to Yoru to express just how amazing this feat of theirs is. They just defeated not one, but 2 of the 12 Kizuki, Lower Moon 1 and Upper Moon 3. Yoru would then cough before agreeing, saying that this is cause for celebration. He would ask Zenitsu to bring him his damaged Haori that he threw away during the fight. Zenitsu did as he was told and brought the Haori. He was told to then check for something inside the Haori, and as he did, he found a bun that had miraculously survived the battle. Yoru would take it and talk about buying from the bento box sellers at the train station after Rengoku told him about the interaction he had with them, and he really tried to make sure that it didn't get messed up during the fight. While the others were conversing, Tanjiro would think about what Yoru had just said before thinking to himself, wait, does that mean that he wasn't fighting Akaza with all he had just now? He was holding back against the 3rd strongest Upper Moon? Yoru would break the bun in 2 before handing one half to Rengoku. They would both bite down on the bun before saying, "Oh my." But just then, it would seem that they would both pass out this time, succumbing to their injuries. Yoru's eyes would open, his vision still blurry and hardly able to see a thing, but he would be able to make out the silhouette of a person moving in the room. He would ask if he was in heaven, and if that person was an angel, thinking that he had died. But instead of an angelic response, he would be met with the giggling of a familiar voice. The voice of one Shinobu Kocho. She would jest and say that that must be the medicine talking, but maybe she should keep him under anesthetics more often. He would then realize that he was in fact not dead, but instead in the Butterfly Mansion. "Oh, it's not an angel, it's just you, Shinobu," he would say. Shinobu wouldn't take too kindly to the implication of the comment, but her normal smiling face wouldn't change. Yoru would then say that he didn't mean to make her mad, before trying to get up but was still in too much pain from all the hits he took from Akaza. Shinobu would help him ease back into bed, before telling him that he shouldn't do that again. He just had a battle with one of the strongest demons to ever exist. He's lucky to even still be alive right now. Yoru would do as she said, but he would ask of the others, before Shinobu would then tell him that they woke up a week earlier, and they're probably out doing some kind of training or the other. Which would then prompt Yoru to ask how long has he actually been out, and Shinobu would say about 3 weeks since the Kakushi brought him in. Yoru would be quiet for a bit, but as his vision finally cleared up, he would begin to really acknowledge all the bandages on him. But then he would remember that Rengoku was also badly hurt, so he would ask if he woke up as well, but Shinobu would then point to the bed right beside him and say he's alive, but he just hasn't woken up yet. This would worry Yoru, but Shinobu would then tell him not to be, that she won't rest until he's back in tip-top Flame Hashira shape, which would actually calm Yoru's nerves a bit, even making him comment that maybe she is an angel after all. The comment would make Shinobu giggle, but just then, Tanjiro would walk into the room, asking to check on them, and his face would light up upon hearing Yoru's voice. Shinobu would let him know that Tanjiro has been coming in to check on him and Rengoku every day since they were brought in. Yoru would smile and say, "All for little old me? Makes me feel a little bit popular." Tengen would definitely be jealous. Tanjiro would smile at the remark, and just then Nezuko would also walk into the room and stand beside Tanjiro by Yoru's bed. She wouldn't say anything, but she would touch Yoru's hand and smile, and Yoru surmised that she was trying to thank him for saving her and her brother once again. Shinobu would then let them know that she was leaving to go get more medicine for Rengoku, before telling Tanjiro to take care of Yoru and Rengoku for her while she was gone. Once she left, Tanjiro would finally ask what he wanted to ask Yoru before at the Mugen Train crash site. He would explain his situation with the Hinokami Kagura and wanting to know more about it. Yoru would just say that the name Hinokami Kagura doesn't really ring any bells for him, but then Tanjiro would ask about Yoru's breathing style because a lot of the movements he made while fighting Akaza felt similar to the movements, if not identical, to the ones in the Hinokami Kagura. Yoru would think about this for a bit, and then his eyes would light up as a thought crossed his mind. Similar, if not identical, huh? He would ask if Tanjiro asked Rengoku this, and he let him know that Rengoku said that himself he didn't know what the Hinokami Kagura was, but he believes that he saw something about it in the original records of flame breathing kept in his family home. But Tanjiro hadn't gone there yet. Yoru would then say, "Great, that means we can go there first thing tomorrow morning." Tanjiro would be grateful for the help but insist that Yoru stay in bed and recover more. He and Rengoku took the worst beatings in the whole Mugen Train situation, but Yoru would lift his hand and place it on Tanjiro's head before telling him it's the least he could do. After all, if not for Tanjiro, he wouldn't even be here. Tanjiro would be stunned to hear his father's name leave Yoru's mouth, and it seemed Nezuko would be as well. Tanjiro would ask if he knew his father, and how he knew him if he did, among other questions, but Yoru would simply say that they could talk about it on their way to Rengoku's place tomorrow. But before they would leave, he would say that their father would have been proud of the people Tanjiro and Nezuko had become. This would make them tear up slightly before turning to Yoru with a smile. Nezuko would nod and Tanjiro would say thank you as they left the room. After they left, Yoru would sigh and say to himself, "The kid's frustrated. You can tell just by looking at him. Probably feels like he should have done more, especially for Kyojiro. He needs all the uplifting that he can get. The younger buds must be allowed to bloom, right, Kyojiro?" he would say as he turned to look at the Flame Hashira's unconscious body. "All in season, and it isn't the season for me to sit on my backside while they struggle," he would say. And just at that exact moment, Shinobu would walk in with the medicine before saying, "You know, as my patient, I advise against getting off bed rest so soon, but I also know that stopping you won't be so feasible. So instead, I provided a way to make your journey a little bit safer." She would then place a cane by his side. Yoru would playfully ask if she was listening in on their conversation, to which she would just smile with no reply. Yoru would try and grab the cane, but his hand would suddenly begin shaking. He would bring the hand up to his face, glaring at it before sighing and attempting to hide it under his blanket. But before he could, he would feel two feminine hands clasp around it. While holding his hand, Shinobu would sit by his bed and say, "You know, you don't always have to put up the front. I know you've taken to being the one to help people when they need it, the one they can always turn to. They're solid rock of some sorts, I guess, but you're not a rock, you're a human. You just fought one of the most powerful demons in existence, and even though you won, you were literal inches away from losing your own life, Rengoku's life, and the life of those kids. You know, you're allowed to be affected by that. You're allowed to be anxious. You're allowed to be scared. There are 10 Hashira for a reason. If the weight ever feels too much to bear, we're here to help each other lighten the load." So she would pull his hand out fully before saying, "You don't need to hide that from us." Yoru would just look at her, contemplating what she had just said, before saying that he's the reason Rengoku is like this. He's the one that made the call about them splitting up, which almost cost him his life, and for all he knows, he could still end up dying. He would also express that if just fighting Upper Moon 3 nearly cost him his life, what hope does he actually have to defeat Muzan? He would go even further, now clenching his fist in Shinobu's hand, which would squeeze her hand, but she wouldn't flinch a bit. His tone would be angrier, as he would say that he still hasn't even been able to find a way to properly use the higher echelon of his moon breathing techniques without causing so much strain on his own body that he ends up doing more damage to himself than his opponent does. How does someone who doesn't even have a full handle on his own breathing techniques promise to help some frustrated kid with his when I'm just as frustrated with mine, if not more? He would say, losing himself in his self-loathing a bit, squeezing even harder on Shinobu's hand, but just then, he would realize what he was doing and release the grip on her, which would reveal a bruise on her hand. Yoru would force himself to sit up and begin to apologize, attempting to get off the bed and get something to help her, but she would stop him, telling him it's okay. Yoru would sit back on the bed, saying that he should have just had more control, trying to remove his hand from her grasp, but she wouldn't let go. Instead, she would say, "Why? So you could keep bottling those feelings until it exploded and caused a real catastrophe? Yoru, I'm a doctor. I'll deal with my hand, but more importantly," her tone would get more berating as she continued, "You're not God, Yoru. You don't give an order and people simply go by force. Kyojiro has free will. He made the choice to trust you. It was as much his call as it was yours. You doubting that is equal to you devaluing the trust he has in you, and I know you don't want to do that. Plus, you make it sound like you're fighting against Muzan and his entire demon army on your own. The same way I'm with you right now is the same way every other person who dons the Demon Slayer attire is with you in this fight. Even if you do fall short, one of us will pick up right where you leave off. And as for your breathing, Yoru, if you don't believe in yourself in that aspect, the Master does. And so do I. And you see those two children, Tanjiro and Nezuko Kamado? They believe in you too. So even if you don't think you have what it takes, we'll make up the difference. The war we are waging leaves mental wounds just as much as it does the physical ones. And if we don't treat them, they'll be just as damaging as the physical ones as well." Yoru would look at her for a bit before looking to the hand that was shaking and noticed that the shaking had stopped. He would lay back on his bed before Shinobu would then place his hand back on him. She would ask that he just let her know before he leaves tomorrow. And after a bit of silence, Yoru, looking up without looking at her, would say, "You're amazing, Shinobu." She would simply smile and say he's giving her too much credit before going to go attend to her bruised hand. The next day would come and Tanjiro, carrying Nezuko in her box, would come over to Yoru and Rengoku's room. He expected to see Yoru in bed, but he would instead see him sitting up with Shinobu reapplying some of his bandages. Tanjiro would be a little embarrassed because he completely forgot to ask Shinobu if it was alright to take him when he was leaving yesterday, but before he could say anything, She would look at Tanjiro with a smile and tell him to take care of Yoru. Yoru would smile at him and say, "I'm in your care, Kamado." He would take the cane Shinobu had gotten for him and begin to use it to limp over to Tanjiro, with Shinobu supporting him. But before they left, Yoru would turn to Shinobu and say, "Thanks for the advice you gave me yesterday." And she would reply, "Anytime." But then Yoru would say, "But Shinobu, I have some advice for you too. Maybe you should take the advice you gave me to heart yourself sometimes. I wouldn't mind donating my hand to the cause either. After all, you did do the same for me," he would say, looking at Shinobu's bandaged hand. She would hold the hand a bit before saying she might give it a try one of these days. Yoru would then exit the butterfly mansion with Tanjiro. On their way to Rengoku's home, Tanjiro would ask Yoru about how he met his father, and Yoru would recount the story of how his father saved his life when he was lost on the mountains where Tanjiro's home was. He would even recount some certain things that happened in Tanjiro's home that Tanjiro's parents had told Tanjiro about, which would fill him with even more awe. Yoru would inquire if Tanjiro's father had died due to the attack on his family, but Tanjiro would let him know that his dad died before that actually, due to whatever illness that caused him to have a frail body. Upon hearing this, Yoru would be a bit relieved, thinking at least he didn't have a violent end. But then, Yoru would inquire about the Hinokami Kagura, more specifically, if Tanjiro could do it too. Tanjiro would confirm this and reiterate that the technique was taught to him by his father. Yoru would then think to himself, "I knew Tanjiro had to be amazing, but if what I'm thinking is right, then he really was a sun-breathing user." But his thoughts would be interrupted as Tanjiro alerted them of their arrival at Rengoku's family home. They would find Rengoku's brother, who would introduce himself as Senjuro, sweeping. They would converse a bit. He would ask about his brother's health, and they would reassure him that Rengoku was making a full recovery. But that is when a drunk man would step out of the house, claiming that they were lying, saying that Kyojiro was probably dead already. He would also lay other insults at the Flame Hashira, saying that he was simply another talentless hack who got himself killed. There are only two types of people in this world, the chosen ones and the talentless fools, and Kyojiro happened to be one of the latter. He probably died within minutes of the Upper Moon's arrival. Senjuro would introduce this man as he and Rengoku's father. He would try to calm his father down, but he would get smacked away. Tanjiro, witnessing that, and after the insults, wouldn't be able to hold himself. He would yell at the man and asking him how he could treat his family like that, saying that about Rengoku, who defeated an Upper Moon. He deserves praises, not insults. In contrast to the agitated Tanjiro, Yoru would just glare at the man with a rather jaded expression. But that is when Rengoku's father would notice Tanjiro's earrings, and his facial expression would change. And this, Yoru would take notice of. Rengoku's father would drop his sake before charging at Tanjiro, trying to grab him by the neck. But with the hand that was not holding the cane, Yoru would grab him by the wrist and in one swift motion, judo throw him over his back onto the floor. Yoru looked down at the man in silence, which would make him angry, screaming that they had come here to mock them, attempting to pull Yoru down, but Tanjiro, remembering Shinobu had tasked him with taking care of Yoru, would rush at the man, headbutting him hard to make him release Yoru. Yoru would be taken back by this, but he would appreciate the gesture. After some time, Senjuro welcomed them both into the home, but only Tanjiro went. Tanjiro's conversation with Senjuro happens as it does in the canon, but now to Yoru's side. Rengoku's father sat by a lake, with his sake in hand, when he would be approached by Yoru, who would struggle to sit beside him due to his injuries. Rengoku's father would be a bit verbally hostile with Yoru at first, but Yoru wouldn't take the bait and engage in the hostility. Instead, Yoru would say, "Rengoku Shinjuro, right?" Former Flame Hashira. Kyojuro would talk about you all the time. And honestly, so would some of the demon slayers who've been in the course for a while. You're meant to be this super amazing, cool, just overall great guy, I guess. But I gotta say, you do not live up to the hype. Shinjiro, who was already heavily drunk, would then say, "So, you are here to mock me." But Yoru would simply say, "No, not really." From one man who doesn't meet his hype to another, I just came to tell you something I recently learned. He would then think of the words Shinobu had told him last night before saying, "It's alright to fall short. It's part of what makes us human." There would be a silence that would fall on both of them before Shinjiro would ask Yoru to truthfully tell him if Kyojuro was still alive, and Yoru would say yes, but also finally let him know about the severity of the situation. In a coma, huh? So that's why he's not home, you say? And what are the chances of him coming out of this coma alive? Yoru would then reply that he wasn't sure. There would be another silence, but then Yoru would say, "But would it kill you to have a little faith? You should see how Rengoku gets when he talks about how amazing his father is. He's always been a bright fella, but he doesn't shine any brighter than when he recounts the amazing stories of the amazingness of his great father, Shinjiro Rengoku, the former Flame Hashira, and how he wants to be just as great as him." Yoru's words would convict Shinjiro to the point of tears. Now crying, he would reject the future where his son would become anything like him. He would remember every time his son tried to make him happy, and it would hit him all at once how much of a fool he was. Yoru would hesitate a bit before putting an arm around the man and saying, "An amazing person told me once that the reason why there are 10 Hashira is so that if the weight ever feels too much for one of us to bear, we are here to help each other lighten the load. I'm the current Moon Hashira, and you're the ex-Flame Hashira, but honestly, I say the time frames don't even matter. Once a Hashira, always a Hashira. So I'm here to help you lighten the load if you need it. And trust me when I say Kyojuro will be as well." Your conversation would continue from there, and some more time would pass. Tanjiro and Senjiro would exit the house to see an interesting sight. Yoru and Shinjiro walking towards them from the lakeside, both seeming to be having an enjoyable conversation, helping each other walk. Yoru due to his injuries, and Shinjiro due to how drunk he was. But even more importantly, the sake bottle was no longer in Shinjiro's possession, but Yoru's. Both of them would be stunned at the sight, especially Senjiro, who saw a semblance of cheer on his father's face. Cheer that his father had not emitted for a very, very, very long time. Shinjiro would ask for Yoru to tell him another one of the stories of his son's great exploits, but they had already arrived at his home, so Yoru told him that he would tell him some other time. Or maybe Kyojuro would be the one to tell him himself, as he let the stumbling Shinjiro walk into his own house. Yoru would then feel someone fall to his feet, and he would turn to see Senjiro, thanking him with tears in his eyes. Yoru would look at Tanjiro, who only smiled at him and nodded. Yoru would bend a bit to pick the young boy back up to his feet and pat his head before telling him to take care of his father, before moving to leave with Tanjiro. But that is when Shinjiro would stop them, calling out to them. He would trip and fall due to his drunken state, but Tanjiro would catch him. Once he got back to his feet, he would first apologize for how he treated Tanjiro earlier, and then proceed to hand him some ripped pages. He would say that he had ended up keeping the pages even after ripping them. They weren't in the best shape, but they were better than nothing. Tanjiro's eyes would light up as he thanked Shinjiro for the pages, then turned to Yoru saying, "This is it. It's the Hinokami Kagura." Yoru would then correct him and say, "No, it's sun breathing." So I was right. You, Tanjiro Kamado, are a sun breather, which would mean that your father was one too. Tanjiro would have questions, but Yoru would tell him that they were leaving, and so they left. On their way, Yoru, holding the sake bottle, would finish the remaining sake in the bottle and say, "Man, Shinjiro does have great taste in sake, I'll say that," before tossing the bottle away and breaking it, and saying, "But I hope he stops with the drinking from now on." Tanjiro would agree, saying that that would be for the best. Tanjiro would then go through the ripped pages that he now had, but he would find it increasingly harder to understand certain things and how they were written due to how damaged it was. But that is when Yoru would take him to a clearing. He would take the pages from Tanjiro and ask him to use what he calls Hinokami Kagura. Tanjiro would do just that, and Yoru's eyes would widen a bit, noticing something. He would then think to himself a bit before saying, "Tanjiro, I've made a decision. I will personally oversee your training in order to help you master sun breathing." Tanjiro would be a bit taken back after hearing this, but then his look of shock would turn to one of being ecstatic. He was ecstatic at the idea, and Yoru would continue by saying, "There's something in it for me too. My moon breathing has always felt incomplete in some aspects, and some of the movements you just made look like the missing pieces to a puzzle I've been trying to solve for so long. So, let's grow stronger together, Kamado Tanjiro." Tanjiro would agree to the prospect enthusiastically, saying, "Yes, sir!" And so would begin the journey to overcome the frustration that both of them felt at their lack of mastery in their breathing styles. It would now be nighttime. Tanjiro had walked with Yoru back to the butterfly mansion and went to get some much needed rest after being through day 1 of Yoru's training regimen. But Yoru would instead go to meet Ubayashiki and inform him about Tanjiro. First off, Ubayashiki would congratulate him for his victory against Akaza, but Yoru would correct him and say it wasn't his victory, it was a collective effort, so they should save the congratulations for when Rengoku wakes up. Now, in other more important news, it looks like I found your golden boy. I found the person you've been looking for so long, Kaguya. Moichiro and I failed to be the sun breathers you sought after, but now you know exactly where to invest your attention. Maybe you can even lay off me a little bit from now on. Ubayashiki's wife would bring both of them tea, and as they drank, Ubayashiki would simply say that he has no golden child. All of his children are precious to him, and they are also all necessary in order to defeat Kibutsuji and his demons. It was never going to be a one-man affair. He would then ask Yoru if he wants to oversee Kamado's cultivation and sun breathing. "Way ahead of you, Kaguya. The real reason I came here was for the book," Yoru would reply, but Ubayashiki would then reply to him by saying, "Ahead of me?" Funny jest, my dear child, as he handed a book to Yoru. "You knew I was gonna come for this?" Yoru would ask as he took the book and stood up. "Take care of the boy, my dear child. He and his sister have been through a lot as it is all Ubayashiki would say. Yoru would then scoff and say, "What am I saying? Of course you knew." "Take care, Kaguya." "Oh, sorry, master," he would say as he would head back to the butterfly mansion. The next day, Tanjiro would be training according to Yoru's instructions when he would voice his frustration with how badly damaged the pages Shinjiro gave them were. But that is when Yoru would bring out a book and say, "Who said we're still using that old thing? We are using this right here. The book of everything known about sun breathing, written by the very founder of the Demon Slayer Corps, who was alive during the time of Yoriichi Sugikuni, the first sun breather, and the progenitor of all the breathing styles." Tanjiro would be shocked and ecstatic to hear that, but then he would pause before saying, Sugikuni? Wait, isn't that your last name? Your ancestor is the father of all the breathing styles?